Well, a man who allegedly tried to steal DVDs from Walmart died after a fight with a security guard and two workers. Police near Atlanta say the three stopped him in the parking lot. This was early Sunday morning. And by the time officers got there, the man was bleeding and not responsive. He died at the hospital. So investigators say the security guard put the man in a chokehold, but they don't know yet how he died. Walmart says the two workers were suspended with pay. The security guard no longer works at the store, apparently. But we want to talk about this with former police detective Steve Kardian, who's joining us now via Skype. Detective, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Pleasure.
So with the fact that the security guard is no longer working there, what does that tell you? What does that reveal to you about his involvement in this? They blaming him?
Well, you would think that he applied the choke. He went beyond the scope of his duty. I don't know any security company, and I do train not only law enforcement but security companies in self-defense, defensive tactics. And no security agency teaches their people to use a carotid restraint or any type of manual configuration on the neck.
Well, in fact, Walmart even put out a statement saying no amount of merchandise is worth someone's life. Associates are trained to disengage from situations that would put themselves and others at risk. So what is that? Does that tell you that maybe these people weren't trained properly?
In all likelihood, they weren't trained to be able to do this type of an application, apply this type of a choke. And as you said, Walmart's policy is to teach their employees to disengage. Now, typically what we see with this type of a choke, when it's applied, if in fact it was a carotid artery choke, is that an individual goes unconscious in 8 to 10 seconds. He may convulse, which would appear that he's still fighting. The individual applies the choke harder until he stops convulsing, and ultimately we lead to death. It also could have been positional asphyxia, or it could have been a manual restraint on the neck.
Yeah, I wanted, because they said he was wrestled to the ground and that when police got there, the three workers were on top of him. So I would think that would indicate some sort of suffocation. If that turns out to be the case, how much trouble is Walmart in, let alone these three people?
Walmart's going to be civilly responsible for his death. We're going to see that come up in the civil case. But if he used a carotid artery restraint and he can't justify that this guy was, you know, brutalizing them, he's going to be charged.
Were you surprised when you heard about this? Because, I mean, the guy allegedly was just getting off with a couple of DVD players.
Well, you know, we assume a certain risk when we engage in criminal behavior. However, to die for stealing 2 DVDs or a few DVDs is certainly way beyond the scope of reasonable.
So you're a police detective. Where does the investigation go now? Are they looking for witnesses? I mean, this was at 1:30 on a Sunday morning.
Well, the ME's office is going to conclude their autopsy, and they're going to be able to tell whether it was a manual strangulation, whether it was the carotid restraint, or whether he had 3 people on him and he died of positional asphyxia. In other words, he couldn't get air into his lungs. So once they determine that, once the medical examiner decides whether or not this is a homicide or not, you will see charges forthcoming if, in fact, it is. If it was an accidental death, he had a heart attack, might there be some responsibility? Certainly Walmart's going to bear the burden of the civil action.
But you would have to think, certainly none of those people meant to kill him. Is there any way that it could be ruled some sort of an accident despite the fact that maybe he was suffocated or you know, we had that asphyxia?
Well, we have seen cases where there were not charges brought, where individuals attempted to control someone that committed a crime, and they piled on top of them, and the man did die of the positional asphyxia. If it was an intended manual restraint, a carotid artery restraint, you will likely see homicide charges come out of this. If not, and it's ruled an accidental death, we'll see a civil action, of course. But the district attorney will present this to the grand jury.
Okay. Hey, Steve Kardian, thank you so much for kind of walking us through what this all means. We appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Sure.